Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're going to talk about something I think a lot of us can relate to, that feeling of being just a little bit out of sync with the world around you. You know, like you're trying to hold on to what you believe in, but the current is just pulling so hard in the other direction. So, have you ever felt like that? Like you're literally swimming against the flow? It's that feeling, right? Where what you believe deep down in your core just seems to clash with what everyone else is doing. It can make you feel pretty alone, for sure. But here's the thing, it's not a new feeling at all. Through this explainer, we're actually diving into a really insightful blog post. It's a personal take on a book by John C. Lennox called Against the Flow. And what's so cool about it is how it takes the ancient story of Daniel, Daniel in the lion's den, and uses it as a kind of roadmap for dealing with the exact same pressures we face today. Okay, so here's our game plan. We're going to see how Daniel's world mirrors our own, talk about that feeling of values getting watered down, and figure out how to stand for what we believe in, but with respect. Then we'll get into some tougher stuff, like what happens when you're not rescued, what makes us more than just animals, and it all wraps up with a pretty big challenge for all of us. So let's start with this idea, a modern-day Daniel. The whole point here is that the stuff Daniel was dealing with way back in ancient Babylon, a culture with totally different rules and values, it's not really that far off from what people of faith can go through right now. You know, that feeling when you say what you believe out loud and the room kind of goes quiet? Yeah, that. And that leads us right into this feeling of our values just eroding away. This is where the author of the post gets super honest, and I think a lot of us can probably relate. It's that feeling where you try to stand up for your convictions, but it feels like your words just evaporate, like they have no weight at all, especially when it seems like everyone around you is just compromising. And he gives some really concrete examples that made him stop and think. He's talking about seeing ministry leaders openly posting party pics on social media, or unmarried Christian couples taking vacations alone together. He even mentions people who call themselves Christians but don't hold to traditional views on things like sex before marriage. Now, he's careful to say he's not pointing fingers, but he is asking, what's going on here? What does this say about what we really believe? Okay, and this is where he makes a really sharp point. He draws this line between how things used to be and how they are now. Back then, he says, when people did something wrong, they'd hide it. Why? Because they were ashamed. Their conscience was still working. But what he's worried about now is this shift from shame to shamelessness, where things are done right out in the open, which might just mean that the conscience has kind of gone numb. Okay, so if that's the problem, what's the solution? How are you supposed to stand up for your beliefs without just yelling at everybody? Well, this is where the reflection gets really practical. It's all about how to protest, but as a participant, not an angry outsider. And this quote from the book really nails it. John Lennox says, Daniel did not protest as an observer outside the system. He protested as a participant. Think about that. He wasn't on the sidelines throwing rocks. He was on the inside working within the Babylonian system. And that's the big takeaway, right? Real change, real influence, it often comes from being part of the conversation, not just shouting from across the street. But let's be real, that's not always easy. The author tells this great little story to make the point. So, picture this. A worship singer with an amazing voice gets a ton of praise. Then a leader comes up and gently, respectfully gives a small piece of feedback, like, hey, maybe try making more eye contact. And what happens? The singer gets totally hurt, offended, and can only focus on the praise. It's such a perfect example of how even when you do it right, people might not take it well. But our job isn't to control the reaction. It's just to be respectful in the first place. All right, we're going to shift gears a bit now to something a little heavier. We all know the stories, right? Daniel's friends saved from a fiery furnace. Daniel saved from the lions. But the book brings up a really tough, challenging question about this idea of being rescued. And this quote from Lennox just hits you. He will not deliver us from our own decisions. Wow. Let that sink in. The idea is that God can absolutely deliver you from external threats, from the fiery furnace somebody else threw you into. But he won't necessarily deliver you from the mess you make for yourself. The consequences of your own choices, those are on you. And to make this idea feel less abstract, the author uses this really powerful analogy from his own life as a dad. He says it's sometimes the most loving thing a father can do isn't to bubble wrap his kid and prevent every single mistake. No, sometimes it's letting them make their own choices and, face the consequences. Because that's how we learn. That's how we actually grow up. So this whole idea of personal responsibility and consequences, it opens up a much bigger conversation, right?
It's about what separates us from just being animals. How do we fight to hold on to our moral integrity in a world that's constantly screaming, survival of the fittest? The blog post calls this the law of the jungle. And it's exactly what happened to Daniel, right? You had these jealous guys who just threw all morals and laws out the window to get what they wanted, which was to get rid of Daniel. It's that dog-eat-dog world where anything goes as long as you end up on top.
But then you get this incredible counter idea. The author pulls in this quote from a scholar named Wesley Huff, and it just flips the whole thing on its head. He says the gospel isn't about the fittest surviving. It's about the fittest, Jesus, stepping down and sacrificing himself for the survival of the weakest. It's not just a different rule, it's a complete subversion of the entire system. And this is where the author brings it all home with a pretty stark warning. He says that when we start to compromise our own values, just to get ahead, for personal gain, we're in danger of losing what makes us truly human. We lose that dimension of virtue and truth, and we basically just become animals, operating on instinct.
Okay, so where does all of this leave us? Let's bring it all together for the final, ultimate challenge. This is the big takeaway, the call to action for anyone who feels like they're just trying to keep their head above water. It all comes down to this one simple, powerful sentence from Lennox about Daniel. Although he lived in this world, he did not live for it. I mean, that's everything, isn't it? He was completely involved in his world. He was a top government official, but his core identity, his ultimate why, wasn't tied to Babylon. He lived in it, but he didn't live for it.
And that really brings the question right back to us, doesn't it? It is so easy to get carried along by the current, to live for the next job, the next vacation, the next like on social media. But looking at Daniel's story through this lens, it kind of forces us to stop and ask ourselves a much bigger question. Beyond all the day-to-day stuff, what are you really living for?